Chapter 89, Very much. Papa tilde. Cosette froze by the door. Her pupils slowly went large, darting her eyes between Conrad and Maxen. Her father was grabbing Maxen by the collar, agitated for a reason she didn't understand. They looked back at her with dread in their eyes. What is going on here? Her voice was low, confusion apparent in her tone. Papa. Conrad automatically released Maxen. His lips opened and closed, but his voice was stuck in his throat. Surely Maxen had the worst timing, but Cosette's timing was worst. Of all the time she could come, she appeared in a situation that was easily misunderstood. I insulted you. Maxen's voice assaulted the building silence in the study room. That's why Sir Conrad is agitated. Cosette frowned at his explanation, while Conrad glanced at Maxen in surprise. Although Maxen wasn't completely lying because he, indeed, insulted Cosette by corrupting her, there was no need for him to cover for Conrad. You're lying, she pointed out and then set her eyes back to Conrad. It's not Max's fault, the kiss is with consent. Maxen's back stiffened as his eyes slightly dilated at her, only to see Cosette staring directly at Conrad. She didn't look like she was taunting Conrad, but rather coming clean to her father. Heck, had she been listening before coming in here? But from her reaction, Maxen was certain Cosette was just as surprised as them when she came. I knew Maxen would tell you about it one of these days, she explained after a moment of silence, keeping her attention to Conrad. That's why when I saw you, I already knew he probably told you about what happened to us during the trip. What happened between you two? Cosette held her breath momentarily at the chill that went up to her spine at Conrad's cold tone. I mean, we didn't do anything further than kissing. Cozy. She froze, sensing the temperature in the study drop to a -0. Meanwhile, Maxen barely blinked, eyes on her. He was aware she was trying to lessen Conrad's anger, but she was just making it worse. No, I mean, Maxen trailed off when Conrad spoke. Max, return to your room. Conrad breathed out and cast Maxen a cursory look. We'll talk about this tomorrow, for now. He set his eyes on Cosette, making her swallow the tension in her throat. For now, I'll talk to Cozy. She's not at fault. Maxen bit his tongue when Conrad glared at him, lowering his head. Yes, sir, please don't be hard on her. Conrad hissed but kept quiet. He watched Maxen bow before the latter glanced at Cosette. His daughter smiled weakly while Maxen gave her a slight bow before leaving the two of them. Maxen looked back at her with worry before he closed the door. That boy, did he think I will hurt you? Mumbled Conrad, recalling the look in Maxen's eyes before he closed the door. A deep exhale escaped his nose, tipping his head at the set of couches, eyes back to Cosette. Sit down, Cozy, let's talk. Cosette pressed her lips into a thin line and lowered her eyes. All right, came out a small voice, dragging her feet towards the long couch. She placed the glass of milk she was carrying on the coffee table. When she raised her head, her eyes searched for Conrad. There near the stand, Conrad grabbed the decanter and a glass of wine. He sauntered back and sat down on the one-seater armchair at the end of the table. He didn't say anything for minutes, letting the silence envelop the room while pouring himself a glass. Papa, are you angry? She asked worriedly when she couldn't take the silence anymore. Conrad hissed after chugging a glassful of wine, making her flinch when his eyes fell on her. No, Cozy, he bent over, placing the wineglass on the coffee table. I'm not angry at you. Are you angry at Max? Conrad raised his gaze at her. No, especially not to him. But you look angry, Cosette pointed out. She had been in this place for months and spent a fair amount of time with Conrad to know his mood had hit rock bottom. It scared her, but she didn't want to run away or point fingers. This was a matter they should resolve, if not compromised. I'm angry that I had allowed him to get too close to you, Conrad confessed as he leaned back, taking off his tie. I had already considered that you two will develop feelings. You're young and curious. Max is someone who didn't have anyone until you came into his life. One way or another, he will become emotionally dependent on you. Conrad slapped the armrest lightly and let out a dry sigh. I thought it was fine since Maxen was already a man, even at a young age. You saw how he instinctively covered up for me, maybe because he didn't want to ruin our relationship. My point here is I am angry at myself, Cosette, he stressed, smacking his lips as he pondered about his reaction. I like Maxen, even so I still got angry when he told me what he had done. I was the one who initiated it, she lowered her eyes. Which makes me even angrier, he returned, waiting for her to raise her head. Deep down, I already thought it was you who started it, and I can't help but blame myself for it. Bitterness crossed his eyes as he chuckled bitterly. You're not a failure for who you are, nor do your actions define you as a person. However, for my daughter to do something extremely reckless, I blame myself for it. I failed you as a parent. It's not your fault. Cosette frowned as she lowered her eyes, pinching her pajama pants on her lap. My actions are my decision, and it has nothing to do with my upbringing. My father raised me the best he could, and what I do with my life and my decision, whether they are good or bad, are solely my fault. Papa, I don't regret it. She raised her head once again, mustering a lifetime of courage to look him in the eye. You welcomed Max in here because of me. You had a good intention. For obvious reason, tears shone in her eyes as she looked back at Conrad. He may not be her real father, but Cosette treasured him like a real one. Thus, although she didn't regret her actions towards Maxen, upsetting Conrad was also something she didn't wish to do. She loved Conrad, and his opinion mattered to him. If he ended up blaming himself and seeing himself as a failure of a father, Cosette would forever blame herself for it. Conrad studied her demeanor and noticed how she held her tears back. I'm not angry at you, he repeated just so she wouldn't have to cry. I know, her voice cracked, gulping the tension in her throat. It's just, don't want to blame yourself too. I can be a failure, but it's not your fault. How is that not my fault? I'm not saying you're a failure after kissing a man. But still, don't be sad. Cosette bit her lower lip, hoping by biting hard would stop the tempting tears building in the corner of her eyes. I don't want Papa to be sad. His lips parted, but he shut them once again. How could he stay angry if his daughter was on the verge of tears? Conrad pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm not sad, he explained under his breath. I'm just exhausted. He opened his eyes once again, clearing his throat and changing his mood with the usual blissful nonchalance. Conrad tapped his fingers against the armrest, shrugging under her gaze. Are you sure? She inquired curiously. Yes, he rocked his head. I'm just tired. Max had the worst timing. Cosette bit her inner lip. You know him. His conscience will eat him alive because he respects you so much. Will you not tell me if he didn't? Well, Cosette. I will, came out a weak voice, pouting slightly. I mean, I won't now, knowing you're still busy with the company and stressed out, but I plan to confess what happened during the trip once you get more spare time and enough rest. There was a moment of silence in the room, with Conrad observing her. Cosette didn't seem like lying. Surely she was smarter than Maxen in these things. Or rather, Maxen's conscience was probably not letting him sleep at night, and he couldn't wait like Cosette. One question, Cozy. Conrad broke the silence that was reigning between them, waiting for her to return her full attention to him. He swallowed a mouthful of air, clearing his throat. Do you like Max as a man? He inquired after a moment of silence, preparing his heart for her answer. Her brows rose at the question she didn't expect to hear tonight. Cosette stared at Conrad for minutes, pursing her lips into a thin line, pondering his question thoroughly. M.H.M. came out a weak hum, smiling subtly as she lowered her soft eyes. Very much. Chapter 90, Toast. M.H.M. very much. Cosette transmigrated into this world of a novel for a reason she didn't know, but right from the beginning, she already wanted to save Maxen. As a reader whose favorite character died a just end fitting for a villain like the cruel Maxen, Cosette sympathized with him. Not that she would give an excuse and condone his wicked actions, but she still loved this villain. The reason she was in the back of the school premises, where she found Maxen getting beaten by bullies from another school. It was also the reason Cosette took him to the hospital. Maxen was the primary reason she transferred from a prestigious academy to a no-name high school. Everything she did from the beginning was out of pity. She wanted to give Maxen the warmth that the author deprived him of. In her understanding, if Maxen had just one person who was grateful for his existence and a single happy memory in the treasure chest in his heart, he wouldn't become a full-blown villain. Although that might not be enough, but just giving him a little bit of conscience could change Maxen's end route. However, she didn't realize until now that this sympathy she had for Maxen had also grown into something else. She didn't know when it started, but sometimes she would find herself looking at him and feeling content with his presence. Whenever the thought of Maxen liking someone else would cross her head, it gave her this sourness tingling in her chest. Although Maxen's aloof and cold personality made that scenario impossible to come face to face anytime soon, it would still slightly upset her. Her imagination was too wild in these types of scenarios. But in any case, Cosette wouldn't dare initiate a kiss if there wasn't any turmoil within. Heck, she even proposed it as if she was simply asking for candy. Would she do that to other male friends? She never even thought of asking Luke to take away her first kiss, no matter how charming Luke was. So yes, she liked Maxen, but she couldn't exercise these budding feelings when she knew she was an intruder in this world. Cosette had another life, a very different one from this. No matter how many times she would wish to stay in this world, the fear of losing everything, her friends, her Maxen, her family, her life, terrified her to a degree unmeasurable. And that fear would never really leave her, even if she told herself not to think about it. She might forget for a day or two, but it would always be in the back of her head. Conrad let out a shallow breath as his fingers were zeroing on his temple. He observed his daughter, and the only thing he saw was the conflict in her eyes and the bitter curl of her lips. When she raised her head, her lips stretched broader, but the restraint in her eyes was obviously apparent. I like Maxen very much, Papa, but don't worry. I don't plan on acting out on these feelings. They'll pass, hopefully, she reassured her tone with a twinge of force. Her honesty momentarily rendered Conrad speechless. Although he had guessed his daughter was infatuated with Maxen, this conflict brewing in his chest left him blank. What should he do in this situation? What should he say? For minutes, Conrad could only stare at her. As he did so, realization slowly dawned on him. Time was truly fleeting. It felt like just yesterday he was carrying her small frame in his arms for the first time. But now, Cosette was telling him she liked another man other than her father. Bitterness, surprise, fear, and disbelief compacted in his chest the more he thought about this. He didn't know he would meet this situation faster than he expected. She had grown and would continuously flourish into a fine young woman. Did he waste a lot of time and miss too many opportunities? Conrad could only nod to himself since he had been busy all these years and didn't notice that time never stopped for anyone. His anger slowly subsided, replaced with bitterness and sadness. Don't he like you? His words already flew out of his lips before he could even think about it. Chem, her brows rose at the question he threw after an entire minute of thick silence. Maxen, Conrad cleared his throat. His muddled thoughts previously because of stress and exhaustion slowly came into place, calming him down. Why do you want to hold back your feelings? Her pupils slightly went huge at the clarification of his question, but quickly, her dilated eyes softened when Conrad offered a slight and gentle smile. She didn't have any idea why Conrad seemed to have calmed down and wanted to know about her feelings. She thought it would be awkward since he was her father. Little did she know, Conrad simply came to a realization during their brief exchange. Conrad had missed many opportunities and situations where his daughter needed him, but he wasn't there for her. Wasn't that the reason the two of them were estranged? Although their relationship had gotten better, Conrad realized he barely knew his daughter. So instead of acting like an overprotective and strict father, he wanted to be someone she could confide in without feeling awkward about it. In this case as well, he could give her proper advice while solidifying his relationship with her, instead of Cosette, confiding to a friend and that friend, giving her wrong and ridiculous advice. Well, I don't think it is something I should worry about for now, Cosette explained, giving him half of the truth and leaving behind the details of her fears of leaving this world. I mean, Max and I are still young. It's not like the end of the world and I have to confess immediately. She smacked her lips and gazed down. It's not like I am planning to confess to him, to begin with. So you'll simply let it pass? He asked, watching her raise her head and nod. If it's meant to be, things will take their course. For now, I simply want to enjoy my youth and help him the best I can, she added, feeling a bit more comfortable speaking her mind after just a few exchanges. Conrad noticed this as well. If in the future and my feelings for him are still there, then I'll take my chances. I think I would have prepared my heart for rejection, once I muster enough courage. Cosette chuckled for a bit, feeling this heavy burden gets lifted off of her chest. If only she knew Conrad's initial thought upon hearing the word, rejection, was a promise that would never happen, she wouldn't be giggling. Well, that was only Conrad's initial thought. Forcing and tying Maxen to his daughter was never a problem, but knowing Cosette, she would rather get rejected than get what she wanted by force. I'm glad you seem to have straightened your resolve regarding this matter. He nodded, pleased that his daughter was still level-headed, regardless of her situation. There was no need to give her a piece of advice since Cosette had decided, and he trusted her judgment. But from now on, you're not allowed to take a step into his room. He pointed at her, making her purse her lips. I'm not worried about Max coming to your room. He never even came close to your room. Then, cozy. Yes, I won't, she perked up in a panic, making him let out a short laugh. I figured it was dangerous. I mean, I need to save some face for myself. And she couldn't keep throwing herself at Maxen, but she kept that to herself. There was a moment of silence in the room, as Conrad simply stared at her defeated mien. He cleared his throat and rested his leg over the other. What brings you to my room, by the way? asked Conrad, changing the subject since there was no point in dwelling on the previous one. Oh, Cosette blinked and cleared her throat. I want to spend time with you. Oh. Papa, you've been busy. You were still busy when we were gone for 3 days and 4 nights. So I was thinking, since you cannot turn your back on the matters of the company, I shouldn't just wait passively for mealtimes, she explained and smiled brightly. That's why I came in here. I know you'll have a glass of wine or rum, so I brought my milk with me. Cosette reached for the glass of milk resting on the coffee table and raised it. I'm not old enough to drink wine, but this is still okay for a toast, right? Conrad was slightly stunned before he chuckled and shook his head. Is there something we should toast about? He asked, bending over to pick up his own glass. Well, she pondered about it for a moment before her lips stretched from ear to ear. We are happy. I think that is enough reason to celebrate about. Amusement fastened in his eyes while staring at her bubbly air. They quickly softened as he processed her words. I see, he hummed and smiled subtly, raising his glass as a gesture for a toast. Cheers to being happy. Her lips stretched even broader until her teeth were showing. And cheers for being together, hopefully forever. She raised her glass of milk and exchanged a look with Conrad, who was smirking in satisfaction at her added remarks, before the two of them chugged down their drinks. Chapter 91, Absence Makes the Heart Grow Fonder. Meanwhile, although Conrad told Maxen to return to his room, which was located on the opposite wing from Cosette's room, Maxen didn't go back to his room. Instead, after a lot of contemplation, he paced back and forth in the lobby before sneaking to the section of the mansion where she would take to go back to her room. He might get in trouble, but he was worried. He wanted to talk to Cosette and apologize if she got scolded because he sold her, or rather, the two of them out. Maxen paced restlessly in the corridor, ruffling his hair in irritation from time to time, and spatting a few chosen cursed words under his breath. I should have let my guilt eat me, he scolded himself, planting his palms against the wall. His breathing had turned heavy from the tension filling his chest. He was aware Conrad would never raise his hand on his daughter. However, that was still not enough to stop him from worrying. Maxen hung his head low, hands still spread on the furnished cream wall. His tousled hair dangled past his eyebrows, eyes brewing darkness as gloom emanated from his broad back. Shit, he spat out another profanity and closed his eyes in distress. I should have kept it to myself. Maxen tried to keep what happened between them a secret he would take to his grave, but every passing day where he would see how exhausted Conan was, his guilt was devouring his soul bit by bit. Conrad was a great man worthy of Maxen's and the world's admiration. By keeping what he did to his daughter a secret, it felt like a bone that was stuck in his throat sink deeper into his chest. But this shame didn't come from an impulsive decision to kiss Cosette. But this shame's source was that he didn't regret it, and he would have no problem doing it again if he had to make the same decision. So when he couldn't take it anymore, he asked Conrad a moment of his time to confess this sinful and shameless desire to her father. He had thought of many consequences. Even the worst possible of getting his life ruined crossed his head, but he still proceeded and confessed. But Cosette just came. Maxen let out another long-suffering sigh as he thought about what could have been happening in Conrad's room. There were many methods to hurt Cosette, aside from physical violence. Maxen could tolerate any beating, but not Cosette. Be it emotional or physical, he didn't want to see her cry once again. Yet he already prepared himself to see her puffy eyes once she returned to her room, and that was because of him. Shit, he cursed at himself in his head, balling his hands into a tight fist against the wall. If he didn't have the slightest self-control, he would have punched the wall to see whether his knuckles break first or the wall. I'm going crazy, foo. Maxen's back froze as soon as her voice rang from his side. His heart thudded as his breath hitched for a moment. Reluctance washed over him, afraid to turn his head and be welcomed with a pair of swollen eyes. He let out a deep exhale, mustering his courage to face what he dreaded. He slowly pushed himself from the wall. He closed his eyes and drew another deep breath. When he reopened his eyes, Cosette was already standing at an arm's length from him. His gaze studied her face, seeing her blink almost innocently while looking back at him with pure curiosity in her eyes. What are you doing here? She asked, knowing this was the first time he came into this part of the mansion. They were just several steps from her room on the second floor. Maxen rarely go up to this floor since his room was on the first floor near the pool and garden. His room was close to all amenities in the residence, so there was no need for him to idle on the second floor unless there was an important reason. You're okay, he blurted out, and his tone had this twinge of relief. Hearing his question, the corner of her lips curled up playfully. So, he was here because he was worried about her. You sold me out, she pouted, punching his arm mildly, her knuckles barely brushing it. How can you do that to me? Cozy ID. Cosette bit her lower lips to stop herself from giggling, observing the lines in between his forehead appear. I'm kidding, Max. I'm not angry, nor did I get scolded for it. His eyes examined her face to make sure there was not a trace of a white lie she could be hiding. I only explained to Papa what happened before we went to discuss my internship in the company, she continued, adding some details of her discussion with Conrad. Well, not really an internship, but more like a tag along with him before the school year starts. Is that your punishment? He blurted out, biting his tongue at the worry filling his tone. No, she smiled, eyes holding his gaze. I just realized that I can't simply stay at home and wait for my dad to return home. It's my idea so I can spend more time with him. I'm being proactive. Maxen remained silent, and even when he wanted to look away from her, he couldn't. There was a bit of sadness that pricked his heart like a needle with the thought of her tagging along with Conrad's endeavors. Her father was a busy man, and as such, she would also become busy. You can apply for some minor position in the company if you like. Her voice snapped him back to the current lapse. I'm sure Dad wouldn't mind since it's better for us to do something before the school year starts. Her smile remained, trying to read his current train of thoughts through his clouded eyes, but unable to make up what exactly was going on in his head. But she didn't dwell on it as she tapped his shoulder slightly. I'm going to rest for tonight because we will leave early tomorrow, she said, retrieving her hand to hold onto her back. Good night, Max. Cosette looked at his slightly gloomy face that could bring rainfall on a cloudless summer night. But Cosette ignored his gloominess and walked past him, holding her hands behind her, and skipped happily while humming a tune. Maxen glanced back over his shoulder and set his eyes on her skipping figure. He heaved a sigh of relief, but also felt this thorn stuck in his throat. Well, why are you surprised? He asked himself. She's meant for big things like that, and her intention is actually good. Maxen combed his hair with his fingers, idling in that same spot as he peeled his eyes away from her. I think getting time off from her is better since it'll be hard to control myself if she keeps teasing me. He thought of many reasons why letting her tag along with Conrad was perfect, and deluded himself that not seeing her for a while would benefit him. However, he couldn't deny the slight nervousness that tagged along with the thought of Cosette's having no time for him. He was used to her presence and her nagging every single day, and the thought that would have to put on a sudden halt didn't sit well with him. What could he do, though? He couldn't stop her despite the separation anxiety crawling under his skin. Little did he know, while he stood idle in that same spot, Cosette was staring at his back while standing in front of her room. Her lips curled up mildly, which didn't reach her eyes. I feel sad that I don't get to spend more time with him, she sighed inwardly, but it's better if we miss each other once in a while and I stop missing my dad, because one particular realization that dawned on her during the trip was that Conrad was her only family. Or at least, Conrad was the only family she knew at this point. She didn't want to regret not having enough time with her father. After all, once school started, she would be busy again and spend more time with Maxen. She would make up to him then. I'll miss him though, she whispered, smacking her lips. With that thought in mind, Cosette pushed the door open and stepped inside her room. At the same time, Maxen looked back one last time, only to see the door close silently. She's not going abroad, he whispered with a deep sigh. Why am I missing her already? Maxen shook his head sideways before he dragged his feet away to his room. Once he stepped inside his room, he looked around silently. The heaviness in his heart gained weight, and the silence was a little suffocating. I'm really, he muttered, trying to pierce the thick silence with his low voice. Going crazy, am I, for wishing she would stay in here and just laze around like a sloth. Because deep in Maxen's and Cosette's hearts, this decision of hers would surely give them enough time to barely see each other for the rest of the school break. That was for her to protect her heart from falling deeper and use that energy to spend more time with Conrad, and for him to have to reevaluate his course of life. But what they didn't realize was that the absence makes the heart grow fonder, and these brief months of staying from each other's way would only make them grow individually. Chapter 92, Joint Project. 1 week later. The next day Cosette proposed to tag along with Conrad. She had to wake up early and wear smart casual. The real Cosette was no alien from the company matters and even handled minor projects in the past. So, aside from the other luxury items in her walk-in closet, there was no shortage of smart casual attires she could choose from. She didn't see Maxen after that night as Conrad and Cosette disembarked immediately after a quick light breakfast. The second they left the Blac residence, Conrad never had rest as he would read documents on the road, answering an important call from time to time. Cosette nearly threw a tantrum as she felt bored. Her father took her words as they were and treated her like a shadow following his trail. The entire first day following Conrad around went by Cosette acting as his shadow. Although he would habitually ask about her well-being, and she would answer them with a slight smile, she realized this would keep up if she didn't know anything. Therefore, with this newfound challenge and fire engulfing her, Cosette barely rested on the first night they came home. Instead, she used her free time to read the current state of affairs of the BLK Corporation. She stayed away from it when she came into this world, so she had a ton of documents to review. Thankfully, Cosette gained the real Cosette's quick learning ability, and she felt familiar with the words. She was able to absorb every bit of information like a sponge. Still, that wasn't enough, and it would sometimes make her feel dizzy every once in a while, whenever her brain was overloaded with complicated numbers and stats. One good thing about getting familiar with the current of the company and how it moved was Cosette's mind drifted from anything else. No wonder the other leads in the novel she read were workaholics. Work was just enough to distract someone and forget the matters of the heart. Not easily, but it was effective. Now, 1 week later, Cosette, although hadn't become a pro, she had a better understanding of the company situation, and thus opened more opportunities for her and Conrad to converse, instead of being just his tail. "So we're giving up the branch in Sherry?" She raised a question, breaking the prolonged silence in the car, on their way to a country club where Conrad would have a business meeting. Conrad placed the document on his lap and set his eyes on her, but instead of meeting her eyes, his gaze landed on the documents in her hand, moving his gaze up to her pretty face. His lips curled up, seeing how she looked matured in just 1 week of tagging along with him. Now, this was the Cosette he knew before she transferred schools. The only difference was that she wasn't aloof and kept her decisions to herself. Instead, she was cleverly using the information regarding their business to strike up a conversation with him. "You don't think it's a wise decision?" he asked back, wanting to hear her opinion. "Well, Sherry is struggling now, both politically and economically, so it is smart to withdraw our investment and cut losses." She pondered for a moment, making him nod in satisfaction. But would this new project generate more profit? Dropping the Sherry branch is a big decision and also an enormous loss, so starting a bigger project is a little risky. His lips stretched upon listening to the entirety of her sentiments. "It is a colossal risk, indeed, but we need to take our chances." "Take our chances?" Cosette tilted her head to the side. The wording slightly alarmed her. Unfortunately, she barely had knowledge of this new project. The reason she brought up this topic despite already knowing the situation in Sherry was not going anywhere good. "It's a joint project," Conrad explained casually. He didn't mind sharing information with her, but his daughter was too busy reviewing the past flow of the company to learn the present current. Therefore, he held back in informing her, since he was afraid she would overload. But now that she seemed ready to know about the current monumental project of their company, he would happily fill her in. Throughout the journey, Conrad patiently told her about the pros of this project and how risky it was. Meanwhile, she listened attentively, raising questions from time to time, allowing Conrad to know they were on the same page. As the father and daughter duo engaged in a professional conversation, Warren, Conrad's executive assistant, could not help but look over from the passenger seat. His lips were curled up to a proud smile, darting his eyes between Cosette and Conrad in the back seat. Now that he was watching those two, he couldn't help but agree that Cosette took after Conrad. She had changed significantly over the past several months, but now that her mind was focused on business matters, she had regained the same tenacity before her change. She might have retained her bubbly air somehow, but listening to her talk professionally like her father gave her a different, sophisticated aura of a grown woman. The BLK Corporation is in great hands. No doubt, Warren thought, peeling his eyes away from the back seat to stare at the road. His smile grew broader at the thought of Cosette being mentored by her father. After all, in the past, Cosette preferred to figure things out on her own, and never once did she ask Conrad's opinion about the company affairs. Not that Conrad treated his daughter's action as a threat, but it was still better if the family business would bring the father and daughter closer, and not separate them. The journey was filled with Cosette's and Conrad's voices from the back seat. Once in a while, Warren would take a call, but most of them didn't require Conrad's attention and deal with it. Or rather, Warren did his best to give the two some time to talk more as some sort of bonding, which the two seemed to have enjoyed. When they were close to the meeting place, Cosette furrowed her brows. If that is the case, why do you sound like we have 80% of losing than gaining? She asked, coming to a conclusion that this project would definitely succeed if they put more attention to it. Conrad had already prepared for any setback and prepared resolution if any of these dilemmas rose. So why was Conrad giving off this slight reluctance about this project, as if he was slightly unhappy with it? Because, Conrad pondered and leaned back. His head rocked back and forth slightly when the car halted in the entrance's driveway of the country club. He cocked his head in the direction where she was sitting, pointing his chin to her side of the window. Because of that, he said, making Cosette turn to her window. The second she met the person standing outside the premises of the elite county club, the corner of her lips twitched. No wonder Conrad felt a little gloomy despite the excellent project was that. The partner of this partnership was none other than the Quinn Holdings, and the man standing outside was Maynard Quinn on the flesh. Cosette looked back at her father apologetically. "Papa, you're really working hard," she expressed, feeling sorry that Conrad had to put up with Maynard no matter how mischievous the latter was. Surely earning money was no easy feat. Recognition appreciated. Conrad let out a long-suffering sigh before the door of the back seat opened up from the outside. Seeing the gloom Conrad would usually wear in the presence of Maynard Quinn, Warren smiled awkwardly. He stepped to the side as his boss stepped his foot outside, jogging to the other door of the back seat. But when Warren reached it, Cosette already opened it. "Let me help, young miss," Warren courteously offered his hand, which Cosette clasped after giving him a warm smile. Just that smile from the young miss already felt like a reward. Conrad would never treat Warren with such warmth. "Well, well, well," Maynard's enthusiastic voice pierced their ears, spreading his arms wide open. "I heard my daughter-in-law has been tagging along, so I expected her presence at today's meeting." Conrad's eyes instantly harbored ill intent in his eyes but kept a calm demure. Glancing at him, Cosette's throat bobbed. Her father looked like the calm before the storm. "President Quinn," Conrad approached Maynard and grabbed the latter's hand, using a strength meant to crush his bones. "What an honor to be welcomed by you with such an entourage." Maynard laughed awkwardly, noticing the tightening grip around his hand. Sorry, he said quietly, enough for the two of them to hear to save himself some face from the people lined up behind him. Seeing this, Cosette let out a long-suffering sigh. Maynard was surely like his son, Luke. He never learned his lesson. She could not help but recall how many times Conrad hung up on Maynard without letting the latter finish his sentence. If Maynard was an arrogant prick, this would be a problem for their company. But well, the two seemed to get along in a unique way. Conrad wouldn't exercise this much patience if he didn't see Maynard as his friend, one way or another. "Good to see you again, Miss Black." Her brows rose when Asher's voice, which was as cool as a midday breeze in a scorching summer, caressed her ears. Chapter 93, The Future Monarchs. "Good to see you again, Miss Black." Cosette glanced to her left and initially caught the straight navy blue suit, then moved her eyes up to see Asher's charming and defined face of a young man. His hair was brushed back cleanly, displaying his awe-inspiring beauty. Surely Asher's face was the type girls and women would line up for. He was still in his late teens, but his exuding appeal was something Cosette could not deny. "If only he's not a jerk," she hissed in her head. Not that she held grudges against him, but she didn't plan to come in between the male and female lead. They could have their happy ending for all she cares. All she needed and wanted was for her baby villain to have a different ending, and Luke too. "It's been a while, young Master Quinn." Cosette tilted her head down slightly, but paid him no further attention as she smiled at Conrad and Maynard. The latter's face was already contorting as their handshake had prolonged more than it should be. Goodness, Papa might ruin this all because of his personal feelings. She mentally shook her head, and at the same time, Conrad finally let Maynard's hands go. "God damn it," Maynard glared at Conrad, letting his hand hang limp until it recovered its strength. "President Quinn, CEO Black, this way please." After several seconds, a middle-aged man approached the two men from the side and motioned his arm. By the way Conrad nodded at the middle-aged man, and how Maynard didn't conceal the disdain in his eyes, Cosette was certain this man was someone who those two men knew and respected. "Cozy," Conrad cast her a sidelong glance, which she returned with a nod. "I'll follow," she replied politely, waiting for those two men to head inside while she followed closely behind. Once the two engaged in business talk, she was certain the air would change. This was akin to two emperors meeting for a peace treaty of both empires, and Cosette didn't want to ruin it. "Ash," this time Maynard cast Asher a look, and the latter nodded. "Yes, father," Asher cast her a look, only to see her glance at him for a second. With that being said, both Conrad and Maynard walked side by side, ignoring the beeline of people bowing as they entered the elite country club owned by the Quinns. Behind them were some important people, such as their assistants, legal teams, and then their children. Cosette was walking just right behind Conrad, keeping her chin up and with a dignified poise. She was presenting her father, and she couldn't allow other people to find fault in Conrad through her. Hence, Cosette used a lifetime of elegance from the original Cosette and carried herself with pride. It was not like she was trying hard. All she needed to do was keep a straight face, and no one would know she was actually a bubbly and silly young lady. Walking beside her was Asher. As they entered the premises, he couldn't help but glance at her from time to time, his eyes fastened with amusement at how differently she carried herself. The playful and reckless young lady in the Quinns' family home appeared to be just a figment of his imagination, and now that same face was wearing this unsmiling face that could make anyone have second thoughts about approaching her. That makes sense, he thought, gazing ahead with his chin up. Now it all makes sense. In his understanding, the reason Cosette had such a respectable reputation in the academy was not because of her high marks, but also the way she carried herself. From what he heard, Cosette was someone unapproachable. She would usually give those who tried to approach her a quick head-to-toe look and leave without giving her feedback. Asher had been questioning this since his first encounter with her, and everything following that was entirely different. It was as though those students in the academy were describing a different person. The only time his thoughts waned was during their last encounter over a week ago. But now that the situation required tact and decency, Cosette turned into a completely different lady. She was graceful and sophisticated, and despite her youthful face, she carried the domineering air just like her father. "I guess I owe her an apology." He smirked slightly, sensing the cold shoulders she was purposely giving him. That arrogant guy surely had a good eye. For a project as big as this, even though they were still at the initial phase of the deal, it was being dealt with meticulously for both parties to gain fairly. This was a partnership, after all. Both Conrad and Maynard knew each other, and they were akin to both gigantic wolves who were trying to get the best of the meat laid between them, unwilling to be taken advantage of. Having both of them in the function hall, where a long table in the middle was set, occupied by Conrad's people, and then Maynard's on the opposite side, discussing business. The constant demands and counters of their bosses relatively pressured their people. Meanwhile, Cosette was sitting in the corner, where she could hear their discussion but was not a part of the table. Conrad insisted on letting her sit beside him, but it didn't sit well with her principles. For her, this was simply a learning experience, and to admire her father from the sidelines while he was doing his business. There were more people who deserved to sit with them, who could actually help this meeting come to a peaceful conclusion. So far, aside from Conrad and Maynard's childish demands just to piss each other off, the situation was at a stalemate. Cosette raised her brows and glanced to her right when Asher sat down beside her. Her straight expression didn't change much, staring at the dashing young man who had breached her territory unannounced. Asher cast her an indifferent look, arching a brow as if silently asking her what was the matter. But Cosette pressed her lips into a thin line and set her eyes on the table occupied with business people. Angry, he broke the silence between them when a minute passed, and she ignored him. "No, I'm sorry," he shrugged, apologizing half-heartedly. "I was wrong and underestimated you. I thought you will not notice." "I'm not angry, young Master Quinn," she repeated just as half-heartedly as his tone, matching the lack of sincerity. "Are you sure?" He let out a dry laugh, clearly enjoying the unspoken humor she was giving him. "You don't want to anger me." This time, she cast him a knowing look and looked dead in his eyes. "You'll know I am angry when I'm angry." He rocked his head, lips closed. "If that is what you say." Cosette nearly rolled her eyes. The more she conversed with Asher, the more this perfect male lead image she had for him showed cracks. If Asher was truly bothered and acknowledged his wrong for judging Maxen without an intention of even knowing him, Cosette would be a little appeased. Not that their last encounter bothered her, and she nearly forgot about it. But since he came to her and brought it up half-heartedly, her disappointment with Asher raised 3 levels. She would rather not have his apology than get such an upsetting excuse, although she believed Asher shouldn't apologize to her, but to Maxen instead. Silence gracefully danced between them as Cosette focused her attention on the discussion ahead. Minutes had gone by, and she nearly forgot about Asher's presence until the latter spoke once again. "What do you think will happen?" She looked back at him after his question. Asher tipped his head toward the table where both their fathers were having a deal. "Do you think this deal will have a fruitful conclusion?" She blinked twice and then set her eyes on Conrad and then at Maynard. "No. Care to share why you said so? He arched a brow, anticipating her explanation. Because they already knew what they would gain and lose. She shrugged, eyes back to Asher. Isn't that the reason for this meeting? It is not the goal because partnership will surely take off, but to cut any losses from both parties. His lips curled up in amusement as he nodded once. How quick. I'm a Black, she smirked proudly, having this strong sense of pride just saying that. We won't allow anyone, especially the Quins, to take advantage of us in this joint venture. That's a little daring of you to assume the Quins will take advantage of your company. But isn't that the same for you? She returned calmly, averting her eyes from him. President Quinn wouldn't free his schedule to deal with this if he didn't share the same sentiments as we do. A short and low laugh broke from Asher as he studied her confident air. He didn't want to admit it, but what she said was right. Maynard wouldn't deal with this himself and send Asher to settle it all on his own if his father wasn't worried Conrad would eat them all alive. It was the same with Conrad. He would have sent Warren to deal with this if he didn't know Maynard would swallow them and would even lick the plate clean. I like how your mind looks, he expressed, making her glance at him, but he had already gazed ahead. It's rare for someone to understand such a tricky situation. Surely you and I will have a fun time together in the future. His eyes narrowed, watching Maynard and Conrad smile at each other to hide their irritation. In the future, when those two stepped down, it would be him and Cosette who would banter like this. I'll surely crush you. He smirked and cast her a side-eye, chuckling when she scrunched her nose up. Think whatever helps you sleep at night. She chuckled, knowing he was simply trying to rile her up, but deep in her heart she took his words as a challenge. Once Conrad retired and Cosette replaced him, she would crush pulverize Asher and gloat it to Conrad. Well, maybe Cosette held a grudge against him a bit. Chapter 94, Why? For the past 2 months, Cosette became Conrad's assistant alongside Warren, her father's executive assistant. They would follow him, deal with matters that didn't need Conrad's immediate attention and the sort. With how busy Conrad was, Cosette naturally thought he would become less busy because of the added brainpower, but she was wrong. If anything, Conrad became even busier, even though his daughter was helping him out. That was partly because of the joint project between the Quinn Holdings and BLK Corporation. The only consolation they had was that Cosette and Conrad were almost together 24/7, and thus they still had time for each other, which was the most important thing to them. Equal to the good and positive things the father and daughter duo appreciated, there were also things they would be gloomy about. Although it wasn't as terrible, they couldn't help it. Warren glanced at the rear mirror and sighed. The mood in the backseat where Conrad and Cosette were was too dark and gloomy. Both father and daughter wore the same sour countenance, sighing from time to time in silence. Master, it isn't that bad. Warren bit his tongue when Cosette and Conrad set their eyes back on him. He cleared his throat. I mean fighting. Warren could only cheer them and shut his mouth, afraid those two would vent their frustration at him. Surely, Cosette was Conrad's daughter, and the more she tagged along with them, the more it showed the semblance. Warren was used to Conrad's temperament, but he didn't expect Cosette would also share the same dismay just after 2 months of her internship. He could only shake his head as they journeyed in silence. Meanwhile, in the back seat, the father and daughter duo let out another deep sigh. Cosette glanced at her father and could not help but sigh once more. The reason for this gloomy mood was... Cosette turned her head to the window when their car halted in front of a Japanese restaurant. Her lips curved down, catching a few parked black sedans owned by the Quins. That was right. Today was another lunch with the Quins, so Conrad was naturally unhappy with it because Maynard never missed an opportunity to tease Conrad. Meanwhile, the reason Cosette shared the same sentiments as her father was because of almost the same reason: Asher. I really hope he is busy and is not here, she prayed silently. Hopping today was an exception and Asher wouldn't be here. Why? Simple. Just like Maynard, Asher would never miss pressing Cosette's nerves at every turn. His insinuation and his smart mouth just never knew when to stop, or maybe he knew, but he simply didn't care. At this point, the dreamy male lead image Cosette had for Asher was pulverized by the male lead himself. He was a jerk, and there was no doubt about that. Cozy. Cosette flinched when the door on her side opened from the outside. When she looked up, Conrad was already standing with his hand laid open. Let's go, he urged. His tone had a tinge of reluctance. Cosette smiled subtly, took her father's hand, and hitched outside the car. Papa, Cosette hooked her arm around Conrad's as they walked towards the establishment's entrance. Don't kill him today. Conrad's expression immediately turned sour. "I'll try." "It's only 2 hours," she smiled awkwardly, knowing this would be one of the longest 2 hours of their life. Conrad didn't speak anymore, as the restaurant staff soon welcomed them. They didn't ask them anything and simply led them to the private section of the restaurant. When Conrad and Cosette stepped inside the private dining room, Maynard and Asher were already inside. The father and daughter duo didn't even try to hide the sigh that slipped past their lips as they marched in, sitting on the thin cushion across from Maynard and Asher. Unlike the gloom dominating Cosette and Conrad's visage, Maynard and Asher were akin to two bright balls of sunshine, as if they swallowed the sun to give off such blinding air. "What's with the mood?" Maynard broke the ice with his jolly tone, grinning from ear to ear until his eyes were squinting. "Aren't you happy, my dearest best friend? It feels like we're simply meeting to settle the dowry before our children's union." "Ha ha," Cosette laughed internally, glancing at her father cautiously, and flinched when she heard a crack in the cup in her father's grip. Conrad's eyes were sharp and dark, staring emotionlessly at Maynard. The latter, who never ceased to make such a joke despite knowing Conrad nearly killed him multiple times, laughed awkwardly. Maynard laughed until it sounded awkward, ending up clearing his throat when Conrad's eyes never left his figure. "It's a joke." When Conrad didn't budge, Maynard elbowed Asher for help, but his son feigned ignorant. Seeing this, Cosette shook her head mildly. If this was before, she would try to appease her father, but the three of them, including Asher, already figured Maynard was a lost cause. Why would Maynard keep making such a joke when he would end up chickening out when Conrad gave his undivided attention to him? That question was never answered, and probably it would never be answered, as they would simply believe it was all because of Maynard's wish to have a daughter. The man only had 2 children, Asher and Luke. One was an arrogant jerk, and the other was an arrogant brat. Fortunately, the staff knocked and served the food before Conrad could start feasting on Maynard's fears. The next 5 minutes were nothing but silence. Watching the food being served, Cosette glanced at Asher when she felt his prolonged gaze. As soon as she did, Asher smiled at her. "Ah, God, I don't want to dislike him further, but he just has to make it hard for me," she thought, averting her eyes to Conrad to lift her mood slightly. For Conrad, Asher was a lot better company since the young man was undoubtedly wise and admirable at such a young age. Hence, he'd rather talk business with him than Maynard. Meanwhile, Cosette was the total opposite. For her, Maynard was way better company than Asher. Since both sides obviously had busy morning schedules, they first had lunch to replenish their energy and brain cells. It would be a silent lunch, if not for Maynard talking, spoiling Cosette with food. The young miss of the Blac family had a great appetite, and she was a little fond of Maynard, so she accepted everything he offered her. Just when she thought it would be a peaceful lunch, she was wrong. With her father eating beside her, the two competed in how much they wanted to show their fondness toward her. Afraid they would fight again, Cosette stuffed her mouth with everything they put on her plate until she felt like collapsing after eating more than she could. "Hee, my daughter-in-law surely has a great appetite." Maynard smiled brightly, cupping his cheek, eyes on Cosette. "What did you say?" Conrad inquired coldly after drinking a cup of sake to wash down the little food he consumed. "My daughter, I mean, the daughter I wish to have." Unfazed by the lowering temperature in the room, Maynard's grin stretched broader. "Hee," Cosette chuckled awkwardly, wiping the side of her lips with a napkin. "Why don't you create one then?" asked Conrad nonchalantly. "Why do I need to do that when I can just propose to my baby cozy?" Maynard nearly choked in his own saliva when Conrad slammed the cup against the table. "Hey, I'm kidding, Tilda. I'm also kidding if my fist land in your throat, accidentally." "Papa, please don't forget about your principles," Cosette gasped, afraid of the growing violence in her father's mind at the frequent meeting with the Quins. For the next 5 minutes, Maynard and Conrad simply bantered before the two excused themselves to the man-made lake within the restaurant's premises, probably to have a smoke. As the two left, the people who were left in the private dining room were Cosette and Asher. Once the servants cleaned the table and replaced it with tea, silence fell in the room. I'm so full." Not having the need to act modestly in Asher's presence, Cosette collapsed to her side and then rolled until her back was lying flat on the floor. She spread her arms open, eyes on the ceiling. Seeing this, Asher chuckled. He picked up the cup of tea and guided it to his lips. But before he enjoyed the tea, he sniffed the aroma and glanced at her who was lying across from him. "You're wearing a skirt," he reminded her, only to get a lazy reply from her. "I'm wearing shorts inside, so there's nothing to see." Cosette burped, feeling a little sleepy with all that food she ate. Why does your dad keeps pressing on about marriage? Is this some sort of tactic to make my dad a felon? Who knows, Asha shrugged. Luke and I are too young for such a serious talk, she yawned, failing to notice the conflict in Asha's eyes. Wake me up when they come back. They won't return for at least an hour. Take a nap, he said, which she didn't argue, knowing their fathers would deal with business talk while they were out together. Cosette yawned once more and closed her eyes, attempting to take a nap without any care, as if she was all alone in this room. Asha kept his eyes on her, smiling subtly as he cupped his cheek. What a beguiling nature you have, he mumbled, chuckling when her breathing grew heavier 1 minute after closing her eyes. How can she sleep like that when I'm still here? You trust people too easily. In contrast to his remarks, his smile grew gentler, like his eyes. For the past 2 months and their constant meetings with the Blacks, Asha had this newfound hobby of pressing her nerves just because Cosette was never afraid of retaliating using her sharp tongue. I also wonder why father keeps insisting about you and Luke when it was obvious you two weren't a match. A shallow breath slipped past his lips, but his eyes only bore pure curiosity at Maynard's action. It would be normal if Maynard would insist Cosette and Asha be tied in marriage. Both of them were capable, not that Asha wished for this to happen since he strongly opposed an arranged marriage. Nevertheless, it tickled his curiosity. Asha kept his eyes on Cosette for a long time, tilting his head to the side. Should I fix her posture? He pondered about this and decided not to. She might wake up and misunderstand. Asha nodded to himself before arching his brows. His eyes landed on her figure once again, sleeping soundlessly as if she was dead. The longer he looked at her, the more his lips curl up unknowingly. He shook his head mildly, turning his head to the window to enjoy the beautiful view of the garden while drinking his tea. Since when, he whispered, blinking ever so tenderly, did she become so relevant to him? Chapter 95, Let's Date. Meanwhile, Conrad puffed the smoke slowly ascending to pollute the air, only to disperse into thin air several seconds later. The strong scent lingered, but the two men didn't mind the pungent scent of tobacco. If anything, they sort of enjoyed the calm it brought. You are breaking those boys, Conrad broke the silence, staring at the small pond several meters from his vantage point. Standing beside him was Maynard, who was enjoying a stick. That was akin to his timer before he starts off pissing Conrad again. Maynard smiled slightly as he huffed the smoke. He glanced at Conrad and arched a brow knowingly, shaking his head, before setting his eyes back to the pond of koi fish. I'm not, he denied confidently. Those boys are too stubborn and prideful to break so easily. Conrad glanced at Maynard. You're always strange. Haha, I can say the same to you. Maynard's lips stretched from ear to ear. How can this overprotective guy allow a young man to live in the same house where he shelters his daughter? Maxen is a good child, Conrad shrugged. You can't say all that with certainty. People change, Conrad. Everyone is so fickle, well maybe, except you. Conrad remained silent after Maynard's remarks and kept his eyes on the still waters in the pond. How Maynard knew about Maxen wasn't important to him. Maynard was an annoying, nosy man. Although this man was currently the head of the Quinn family business, he was just like how he was when they first met. I can say the same to you, he muttered calmly. People are fickle except you. Hee, come on, I might fall in love with you now. And I still wish you dead. Later. A miserable death. Maynard's frown deepened as he scrunched his nose up, looking at Conrad's unchanging countenance in dismay. Surely, Conrad never changed. This man in the Black family could utter such scary words with a straight face. I'm not arranging Cozy to any arranged marriage. Conrad changed the subject after a minute, casting Maynard a sidelong glance. She's a smart young lady, and even if I want to protect her, I can only do so much as to know the people approaching her. Stop spewing nonsense and giving your son a ridiculous idea. He peeled his eyes away from Maynard and back to the pond. Although I don't worry about your eldest, pushing his little brother to my daughter will raise questions. After all, the young Master Quinn is a proud and capable young man. His ego for seeing his father pushing his immature little brother into an exceptional young lady will raise questions not to you, but to himself and his capabilities. You're saying this not because you care about my sons, but you simply want to brag about your daughter, isn't it? Maynard scrunched his nose up, seeing that Conrad didn't react in the slightest. Even so, he had known Conrad for decades, and he already knew the answer. Tusk, he shook his head and clicked his tongue, shrugging. It's not like I can argue that the young miss of the Black family is exceptional. She is almost like Asher, with a bit of Luke's personality. A sigh slipped past Maynard's lips. Why wasn't I blessed with a daughter? Just what sort of position did you? Maynard bit his tongue when Conrad's piercing gaze landed on him. Fine, he raised his hands in surrender, rolling his eyes. Maynard idled for a moment, staring in the same direction Conrad was staring at. I'm not trying to break my sons, nor I am testing the waters, he spoke after another moment of silence. The side of his lips curled up, and as his smile reached his eyes, a glint flickered across them. I'm teaching them a lesson that will make them men. This time, Conrad could not help but cast Maynard a look. His brows rose, seeing the cunningness from wanting to discipline his boys with a tinge of softness in Maynard's eyes. It may not be the softest method, and it might somehow break their hearts, but I believe in them. Maynard rocked his head. And I believe when they realize that not everything they want can be theirs, they will learn why you and I reached this far despite the vile world we moved in the past and in the present. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other in silence. Maynard sported this proud smile, as he knew his intentions might be called tough love, but his faith in his sons was solid to shape those two to become good people. However, Conrad kept his stoic face, making one wonder what was going on in his head. You are, Conrad trailed off, noticing Maynard's anticipation of his praise, using my daughter as a lesson material. Hello. Maynard took a cautious step back, sensing Conrad focused on that fact instead of Maynard's parenting methods. Before Conrad could do anything, Maynard immediately fled to save his own skin from whatever this crazy overprotective father could do to him. Seeing this, Conrad stayed in the same spot but kept his eyes where Maynard fled like a flash. A shallow breath slipped past his lips, shaking his head mildly. No matter how hard he believed in his sons, that is still plain cruel, he muttered, but he knew he wasn't in the position to lecture Maynard on how to become a father. After all, as a parent himself, he wouldn't want Maynard prying on how he parent Cosette. Both men had their own methods of managing their businesses, and it was the same as raising their children. They could only point at things, and that was all they could do. But well, it might not be that bad, I hope. He peeled his eyes away from where Maynard left to the pond. After all, he had to learn his lesson the hard way. It's better if he teaches his boys now, since life isn't an easy teacher to deal with. Why are you looking at me like that? Cosette rubbed her weary eyes and frowned, seeing that Asher was still sitting on the same spot across from her. He was cupping his cheek, eyes on her. Just now, Asher woke her up after a 40-minute nap, and their fathers still hadn't returned, so she was still a bit sleepy. You have a drool, he remarked, chuckling when she hurriedly wiped the corner of her lips in panic. I'm kidding. Cosette glared at him. Is making fun of me that fun? She complained. It is fun. Her expression turned more sour, but instead of arguing with him, Cosette chose to ignore him. She fixed her hair, combing it with her fingers while he watched her. As she put on some clip to the side of her hair near her ear, she paused when Asher raised a question. Do you like Luke? He asked, waiting for her to look back at him. You know he's very fond of you and had switched schools just to follow you. We're friends, was the only answer she got as she continued to fix her hair. I like him because he's a dear friend to me. So you don't like him in that way? What way? The romantic way, he shrugged when she shot him a frown. I don't think you are that naive enough not to understand that with our status, arranged marriages aren't new. Our Quinn family strictly follows tradition because of the elders, and if they will arrange our marriage, Luke or me, you will surely become a top candidate. My dad will not allow it. Her expression died, although she didn't feel angry about the topic since Asher, although a jerk, was sensible. I don't need a man's help to lead our company someday, so even if the Quinns are perfect and wise decision to have a familial relationship with, I will not marry Luke just because of mutual benefits. You are saying you will not marry my brother unless you will fall in love with him, he asked, and she nodded immediately since that was the simplest explanation to that. Asher stared at her for a long time until she finished putting the third clip to the side of her hair near her ear. But why? Her brow arched when he trailed off. Do you only mention Luke as if he is the only candidate you can fall in love with? Huh, she tilted her head to the side. Luke is not the only Quinn who can marry you. Asher didn't beat around the bush. Why am I not a candidate? Cosette blinked twice, processing his words and auto-translating their meaning in her head. For a moment, Cosette could only stare at Asher until her mouth fell ajar. What? She asked, despite knowing how stupid it was since Asher already made it clear. I'm not saying I like you, but being neglected and not considered doesn't sit well with me, he explained in the same languid tone, keeping his pair of unreadable eyes on her. I strongly oppose arranged marriage, since it makes me think my capabilities alone aren't enough, and I need a third party to secure the family business. Even so, it is annoying when everyone thinks Luke is the only person who can match you, when I personally know I can handle someone like you. Cosette frowned, watching him lean his arms against the tiny table separating the two of them. Asha bent over, eyes glinting sharply, making her gulp. Let's date, Cosette Blac. Chapter 96, A Summer Well Spent. Let's date, Cosette Blac. Cosette stared at Asha blankly before her head cocked to the side. For a moment, she questioned her ear for deceiving her, but because of the look in his eyes, there was no way she heard him incorrectly. Ha, came out a chuckle, sprawling her hand over the chabudai and touching his forehead. He frowned at her action, seeing that she wasn't taking him seriously when it took him a lifetime of arrogance to propose that idea. Stop it, he slapped her hand away mildly. Wow, there's a limit to how you tease me, young Master Quinn. I'm not teasing you, he breathed out, impatience apparent in his tone. I am serious, Cosette, let's date. This time Cosette looked at him in dismay. Her eyes bobbed, examining him carefully. If this was before, she would slightly panic, but no. After 2 months of constant interaction with this guy, Cosette was aware this had nothing to do with feelings or whatnot. Asha was an arrogant young master. Although he wasn't as high profile as his little brother, Asha was used to the world revolving around him. Hence, when things were something that was out of the pattern he was used to, he would tend to delve into it to fill his curiosity or just to feed his ego. Why, she asked, leaning her arms against the table, why do you want to date me? Do you plan on marrying me? If you want to date me, then it is only normal for you to have plans to marry me so we can start family planning, she explained casually, trying her best to sound natural without laughing. So, do you want to marry me? Will you give me your word? Asha's mouth opened slightly, only for him to shut them again. His eyes remained on her and she seemed serious about these principles she had on dating, marriage, family planning. Wasn't she going too fast? A shallow breath slipped past her lips while shaking her head. His lack of answer was enough for her to know the answer she was looking for. Although he was arrogant in his own cunning way, Asha was a man of his words. He was the person who would keep his word as much as he could, so a half-hearted promise was hard for him to speak without a second thought. What are you thinking about asking me on a date? She broke the silence between them. You know Luke is wooing me. Do you know what he will feel if he hears about this? What about it? He returned almost immediately and coldly. What do you mean, what about it? She repeated with a frown. This is why Luke is my friend and you're not, yet. I'm not saying you should act like a martyr, but to purposely use me for whatever means is an insult not just to me, but also to your brother who had been sincere with his feelings since day one. Cosette pushed herself away from the table and straightened her back. Young Master Quinn, you are better than this. I don't know what suddenly pushed you to propose such a ridiculous idea, but I'm disappointed. You might not care about what I feel or my opinion, but there are certain things you cannot force or get by force. Money can only give you that much, but honestly the baseline money gives you isn't much. She tapped her chest with her index. Money and mutual benefits aren't everything. They only work in some areas and are a big factor in business. But sometimes, even if you are lacking in those, you just need a heart and hope your sincerity will be appreciated. Her lips curled up peacefully. Don't do that again, okay? Asha stared at her kind smile in silence and his hand under the table balled into a tight fist before they loosened. Her words were akin to a riddle to him. However, even before he could speak another word, the door slid open. He didn't take his eyes off of her, even when she gazed in the door's direction, and smiled. Cozy, let's go, urged Conrad with his classic dull tone, to which she replied in a lively voice. Just as Cosette was assisting herself up, she looked back in Asha's direction. Seeing that he was simply looking at her with a pair of unreadable eyes, she knocked on the table to take him out of his trance. See you around, Ash, she grinned and erected a finger. Behave. With that being said, Cosette rushed outside to follow her father. Meanwhile, Asha remained in the same spot for minutes. He didn't even budge when Maynard's assistant came to tell him they would leave. I'll stay here for a while and he can go first. Asha turned his head to the window's direction, while the other man bowed and left without a word of refute. He breathed out, almost chuckling as he recalled what she told him. Although she didn't directly refuse him, she refused him. He wouldn't sugarcoat it and hold on to hope she was simply playing hard to get because she wasn't. Asha wouldn't delude himself. How odd, he thought. You just need a heart, he repeated, narrowing his eyes, and hope my sincerity will be appreciated. What did that mean? What if it wasn't appreciated? Myriads of questions hovered over his head with that simple statement that was easy to understand, but at the same time not. At least, it wasn't that easy for him. How could he? Since birth, everything he did was exceptional and was greatly appreciated. But now that he thought about it, he realized everything he did in the past until now, he never asked for recognition or appreciation. Why would he? People would naturally give it to him to the point it was too much and annoying. So in his understanding, appreciation would naturally come if one put an effort into it, not hope. Did she call me? The side of his lips curled up, recalling another thing before she left. Ash, ha, how sweet. Although her words were akin to a hard riddle he wanted to crack, he hardly felt annoyance at her refusal. Perhaps it was because of the extreme beliefs she had about dating, or because, deep in his heart, he hoped she wouldn't accept it that he didn't feel irritated. She's right, though. He closed his eyes and let out a deep breath to clear his head. I shouldn't have even proposed such an idea without careful consideration. When he reopened his eyes, a subtle smile appeared on his face. This time, I truly owe her an apology, Luke too. If Cosette was a little heartless, Luke's and Asher's already strained relationship would only worsen. Asher couldn't believe himself, and now that he had a clearer mind, he was also disappointed at himself for not considering his little brother's feelings. Although the very reason he thought of asking Cosette on a date was that everyone was just being too considerate to Luke, while he only thought of pressure being the eldest, it was still wrong from every angle. The pressure on Asher twined with the recognition and appreciation was what he was born to carry. He shouldn't blame that on Luke. When he reopened his eyes, he chuckled bitterly. He will really kill me this time, he mumbled, thinking about Luke's explosive temperament if Cosette agreed just to cause an accord between the two brothers. How embarrassing. Meanwhile, are you all right? Asked Conrad, watching Cosette snap out of her trance. You had been silent, everything good. Her lips curled up as she drew a deep breath. Papa, what do you think of the young Master Quinn? Asher, he repeated, and she nodded. Conrad pondered for a moment and answered truthfully. He is capable and admirable at his young age. Anyone can see the Quinn Holdings' bright future if he leads it once he is old enough. Not that, she crooned. I mean as a person, what do you think about him? This time it took Conrad a moment to think about his answer. Arrogant. Why? She asked out of plain curiosity, a bit surprised at his answer. Although his business insight is exceptional and everyone can see he will best his father, Asher is a person who never walked on a rocky road, Conrad explained. I'm not saying everything came to him easily, nor I am saying he didn't work hard to build his reputation, but there were certain things he lacked. Such as appreciation, understanding, and, he looked at Cosette as he paused, experience. Oh, no matter how perfect you are in running a company, if you lack an understanding that your people had their own lives to live and certain things will come that are beyond your control, you'll always meet a bottleneck, he added, casting her a knowing look, and smiled. Conrad sprawled his arm at her and patted her head gently. That is why I am proud of you. Running a company and making money is rather easy, compared to time and experience. Keep learning through experience, and I'm sure you will be just as great in the future. Cosette blushed as she returned his gaze sheepishly, pleased to hear such praise from the man she admired the most in this world. Making him proud makes her happy. Why did you ask? Conrad inquired as he withdrew his hand from Cosette. Well, she smacked her lips and pondered about her reply. I'm just curious. I thought he upset you. Haha, no, she chuckled. It's just, I can't help but wonder if he is happy. His brows furrowed. You are curious if he is sad. No, happy, but well, that is not part of my internship, is it? She grinned, an attempt to put this conversation to a halt, even though she was the one who brought it up to him. Even if I still want to be friends with him, I shouldn't stick my nose to places it isn't welcomed. The Quinns will welcome you with open arms, but yes, not them. Cosette chuckled as she sensed dismay from Conrad once again. With that being said, the two continued to converse until their next destination. Their conversation grew more casual and natural, broaching anything they could from people to business affairs. A habit they would find themselves in the next several days, until Cosette would have to prepare before the start of the school year. If she was going to describe her summer, she would say it was a busy but memorable one. Chapter 97, Dreams. Today was Cosette's last day as Conrad's assistant, and she couldn't help but smile at it. Not because she would now have a break, but because she learned a lot in the months of working side by side with Conrad. She met a lot of different types of people, cunning, smart, happy-go-lucky, and even weird ones. It was a good summer, she mumbled while lazing on the bed after showering. Although it is tiring, it felt rewarding in a way. Usually, Cosette would sleep immediately once she returned home, but since it was her last she got this sort of unknown spirit, and she didn't feel that tired at all. She could only smile at the ceiling, enjoying the softness of the bed and the fresh scent of her room. She drew a deep breath and closed her eyes. When she reopened them, her lips stretched from ear to ear. "I should write about it tomorrow," she mumbled, thinking that she had skipped a few days of writing in her journal because of their hectic schedule. But since she still has a week of preparation before the start of school, Cosette didn't feel the need to write everything. "Ah, my bed, so soft." She rolled on the bed lazily, giggling when she felt déjà vu. On the first day of the summer vacation, Cosette also rolled on the bed to enjoy her first day of vacation, only to feel bored minutes later. But now she didn't feel empty, but rather excited. It was only a week before the start of class, and she truly missed her friends. Although she kept in touch with them, she wasn't able to hang out with them. She would sometimes have lunch with Luke since he would come by to the office, but that was it. She didn't even have time for Maxen. "Now that I think about it," she trailed off, lying flat on her back once more after recalling Maxen. "I heard Max was also busy doing classes the entire summer. Wow, we lived in the same house, but I don't think I saw him for the past months. Even if she did, she was probably too groggy to remember." Cosette blinked and blinked, a little amused how she survived without seeing Maxen's charming face for a day, let alone a full 2 months. She knew she would be busy when she decided to tag along with Conrad, but Cosette didn't fathom she would be that busy. She didn't realize until now that it was her last day of being her father's protégé. "Max," she whispered, and her eyes softened. "I kinda miss him. I should bother her tomorrow. He wouldn't be having classes 1 week before the school starts, right?" She mulled about it for a while before coming to a conclusion. Cosette nodded, convinced that she should start focusing on Maxen again. Her confidence that he wouldn't become a villain was high, but still, she missed pampering him. Maxen was the highlight of her day, and she couldn't wait to share her experience with him and hear about his summer as well. "I'm just glad that he is doing something during my absence," came out a murmur, smiling subtly at the thought. "I hoped he wasn't bored, and he had tons of experience to share." Cosette stared at the ceiling until her eyes felt heavy. Her blinks grew slower until they closed and fell asleep. As the time passed and her sleep grew deeper, Cosette was pulled into a strange dream. In this dream, she was writing her journal like usual, but unlike the usual smile on her face, Cosette was writing it solemnly. She wasn't the sweet 16-year-old Cosette, but the gorgeous 26-year-old woman, sitting in this very room that seemed untouched because of the difference in the style of her clothes and the room's interior. Cosette looked unhappy as she wrote silently. Although eagerness was absent in her eyes, the way the pen moved never stopped. She was writing as if it was the last day of her life, biting her lips from time to time as if to hydrate herself. The only time she stopped was when drops of blood smeared on the blank area of the journal. Cosette touched her upper lips and checked her fingers, but alas, she didn't react strongly as if she wasn't surprised at her nosebleed anymore. Cosette only reached for the tissue and wiped her bleeding nose. While doing so, she continued once again in silence. One would wonder what she was writing, but well, it wasn't really important, since it was only for her entertainment. "BZZ." Cosette snapped her eyes ever so tenderly when her phone kept vibrating on the desk. She looked at it for a minute, pondering whether or not to pick up the call. In the end, when the phone stopped vibrating, only to vibrate again, she finally sprawled her arms to reach it and answered. She didn't speak as soon as she placed the phone in front of her ear, nor did her cold expression change. She just listened silently to the person talking from the other end of the line. When her lips parted, her lips curled up into a smirk. "What for?" came out a mature and seductive voice. "My life is not as interesting to remember. I know someone's life who is even more interesting." Her eyes fell on the journal in front of her and smirked. Without saying another word, she ended the call while the person on the other end was still talking. After placing the phone to the side, she picked up the journal and leaned back, reading her handwriting. "Very interesting indeed," she whispered, eyelids drooping. "This will keep me entertained, hopefully." The 26-year-old Cosette was gorgeous at every angle, and the slightest movements of her eyes or finger screamed elegance. However, for a woman who had it all, her eyes bore emptiness. They didn't even bear sadness or happiness, making her look even more dangerous. For someone who wasn't sad or upset about her situation, Cosette had accepted what was about to come so easily. After all, just as she said, she didn't want to remember her life that much. not because she didn't love her luxurious life and successful career. If only we had enjoyed our youth, she whispered once more, keeping her eyes on the journal. Maybe we wouldn't turn something like this, don't you think, Mr. Devilsin? Cosette snapped her eyes open and gasped, seeing the very familiar ceiling of her room. Her brows creased as she massaged her temple. A dream again, she whispered as she lazily sat up, looking at the window and seeing it was just the crack of the day. However, she didn't feel sleepy anymore after waking up to another dream of her adult self. Her lips curved down, recalling just snippets of her dream. All she could remember was she was in this room and writing in her journal. It had always been this way for the past several weeks, and she already learned not to dwell on them. Cosette thought she was simply having dreams of her adult self since she had been involving herself in the company matters. But this dream in particular left this deep impression in her heart. She felt the emptiness that Cosette had from her dreams. It wasn't like she was sad or anything of the sort, but the emptiness was something that could make one ask why. Why were you so empty when you already had everything? Successful career, wealth, and fame. Right, she whispered as she looked around the room and frowned, almost in tears, as she realized why that Cosette in her dreams felt empty. I was alone. Tears shone in her eyes at the thought of it. Although she knew she wouldn't be alone, her tears wouldn't stop flooding her face. Cosette didn't know if that was the real Cosette or her. This thought didn't even cross her. All she felt was the emptiness of having everything but no one. It almost felt like a waste. Her life was a waste, but it was already too late to regret it because time was something she could never buy. I feel like a drama queen, she mumbled, wiping her eyes with her arms. Why am I crying over a dream? Cosette wiped her eyes until she recovered from shedding tears. She took a deep breath and breathed it out through her lips, repeating it until she didn't feel like crying anymore. When she fully calmed down, the sun had already risen to announce to everyone it was another day. She looked at the window and smiled subtly. I'm not wasting my time now, she whispered, thinking that she had all the time in the world and she had been spending every second worthwhile. That's right, she cheered herself, holding her fist up, huffing. I will cherish every moment I have here and won't have any regrets. Her constant dreams felt like a reminder for her to live her life to the fullest, giving her this new drive to live day by day, without worrying about the plot of the novel. Chapter 98, Who Are You? Cosette couldn't fall back to sleep, so she simply lazed around, doing whatever, until she eventually forgot about her strange dream. As usual, Cosette started her day earlier, going through her morning ritual of having some quality time to herself. This time, however, she especially took her precious time since she didn't have any plans for the day. When she was already satisfied pampering herself, Cosette left her room with such luster in her eyes. Greeting everyone on the way, butler George stopped her, only to tell her Conrad left a word he wouldn't join her for breakfast. Cosette simply smiled and nodded, heading straight to the dining hall. She had been Conrad's junior for months. Thus, Cosette knew Conrad's schedule like it was written on the back of her hand. When the food was served, Cosette was about to enjoy her breakfast when she frowned. Where's Maxen? Asked Cosette to the maid who was pouring her a glass of water. Sir Maxen left early today. Cosette's frown deepened. Where did he go? It was his last day of class, and he had to get his certificate. Oh, she rocked her head, sporting a smile at the maid before the latter left. When Cosette was all alone, she couldn't help but sigh. For the past months, she got used to eating little in the morning and as a king at noon. Conrad never allowed her to go with an empty stomach, but the dilemma here was, aside from eating, she was used to having company. She stuck beside Conrad the whole day, and even if she would have snacks in the car, Conrad was there. So eating breakfast alone felt unfamiliar. No wonder I didn't see Maxen that much, she mumbled, picking up her cutleries languidly. He was probably just as busy as I was. Just what sort of classes did he enroll in? Cosette talked to herself as she started digging in, wondering what kept Maxen busy these days. It was already a surprise that Maxen decided to enroll in short classes, and didn't take her advice to apply to their company. Not that her suggestion was terrible. It was a wonderful experience, and Maxen would learn a lot about everything. But then again, even if Maxen applied for an internship, they wouldn't see each other that much since Conrad was always out and about, attending meetings here and there. Also, Maxen had his own money now to spend since Conrad was still paying him for his hard work in looking after Cosette. She hadn't seen him splurge money despite his handsome salary, so he had his savings for sure, and gaining skills wasn't also a terrible route. Still, her intrigue piqued about why and what classes Maxen enrolled in. Cosette chewed slowly, holding her fork as she forked out a piece of green. I wonder what time he goes home. she mumbled, sighing once more. If he is receiving a certificate, he should have at least told us or me, since that is like a graduation. She shook her head mildly, shrugging. Well, I should hold a mini celebration for accomplishing our agendas this summer. With that idea in mind, a newfound excitement swelled in her heart. Cosette giggled as she gobbled up her food with a smile, excited to do some planning. When Cosette finished her breakfast, she was like a sloth who lazed around the living area. Everyone in the manor was so busy, especially in the morning. Watching the servants walk in and out busily, she sighed. Even though they would smile at her and no one asked her for any help, she felt a little sour. I always tell myself being lazy must be fun, she thought, lying dead on the couch with her toe and other hand touching the carpet. It's boring. I wished I can bother Luke, but I think he told me he has an event today. Everyone is just so busy. Suddenly, her phone vibrated under her arms. Taking it out and holding it over her face, her frown deepened. She just received a reply from Sarah, telling her she was out and helping her auntie. And then Faye also replied to her, telling her she was also in their family home. Amy didn't have any particular plans for the day, but she said some of her relatives would be coming over and she had to stay home. Another sigh escaped Cosette's mouth as she tossed her phone to the side. She only asked if the girls were free today so they could hang out, but those were their replies. Not that Cosette couldn't understand, but she couldn't think of doing anything else for today. And to think it's just an hour since I had breakfast, she mumbled to herself, staring at the ceiling with dead eyes. I'm doomed. Surely, after being used to having agendas every single day and having a busy day, going back to doing nothing wasn't as easy as it sounded. Cosette didn't have other hobbies. So it only made things hard for her. From now on, I should, her brow arched as she cocked her head to the side. Wait a minute. Cosette rolled to her side and searched for her phone, which she found under the pillow. Without further ado, she worked on her phone and searched for any novel apps she could find. It wasn't that she didn't have a hobby. It was just that after entering this world, she had been busy doing anything else and almost forgotten the hobby that allowed her to kill time in the hospital. Her lips stretched from ear to ear as she downloaded all sorts of novel apps and comics. Since she believed she was in the novel, she initially thought there wouldn't be such things, but after months in the company, this world felt more like the world where she came from. Excited, Cosette browsed for good stories to read and immediately found one. It didn't take long when Cosette found herself scrolling and scrolling, gobbling up the words of the author. A giggle would escape her mouth from time to time, completely forgetting she was simply lazing for an hour before she starts planning how to celebrate her and Maxen's small win. And before she knew it, it was already past noon. While Cosette was giggling playfully, facing the backrest of the couch with her phone close to her face, she didn't notice when the entrance opened. Coming in was a young man in a simple loose t-shirt with a jacket draped over his hand that was clinging onto the door handle. He glanced toward the couch where he heard the giggling, tilting his head when he caught her lying there with the pillows scattered around while munching snacks. The side of his lips curled up as his eyes softened, closing the door carefully not to disturb her. Since Cosette was facing the backrest of the couch, Maxen couldn't see her face. He sat down on the couch across from her. He tossed the jacket over the armrest, leaning back comfortably and staring at her back. I missed her was what crossed his head, seeing that Cosette was just there giggling while reading something on her phone. In the past months, Cosette was the busiest, in his opinion. Sometimes they would come home very late at night. Even if they come home early, she was buried with the workload. It wasn't that they didn't really meet in the past 2 months, they lived in the same home. However, it still felt like they didn't. There were times he would approach her, but she was too groggy or her mind was drifting somewhere else. It made him proud of how serious she was in her job, making him work just as hard. Even so, he missed her. I wonder what she's reading. He cocked his head to the side, blinking countless times. Whatever she was reading was definitely an important document regarding company matters. No one would look that excited reading stats. Maxen didn't speak a word and just sat across from her, watching her silently without letting his presence known. But even with his undivided attention, he still flinched when she squealed. Kaya, this is not a drill. It's happening, Tilda. Cosette sprung up to her seat, causing some chips to fall on the surface of the couch, but she didn't pay attention to it with her eyes glued to the phone. Her lips stretched even wider the more she read, taking her precious time to read as if that would lengthen the chapter. When a minute had passed, her squeal pierced the air again, blushing. She picked up the nearest pillow around her, burying her face while kicking her feet mildly but quickly. Little did she know, Maxen was watching her squeal like a little girl. Is the story that good? He asked out of plain curiosity, breaking his silence for the first time. It is, they're about to. Huh, Cosette trailed off as her brows furrowed at the unfamiliar warm baritone voice behind her. Looking back, the lines between her brows deepened, sizing up the young, hot specimen looking back at her. Her pupils slowly dilated as panic swelled in her chest. Who are you?